Frost Nixon is a play that's based on the actual interviews between British talk show host David Frost and former President Richard Nixon from the 1970s, and they go really in depth into how the behind the scenes of the interviews, how the interviews came to be, because it's kind of like a real underdog story. Because imagine, you have this talk show host that no one really takes seriously, but he wants to kind of prove his journalistic integrity, and no one's really going for it. And then he goes in, and this is actually, it's one of the most successful interview broadcasts of the day, and this is just the story of how those interviews came to be.
Good evening. This is the 37th time I've spoken to you from this office, where so many important decisions have been made that shaped the history of our nation. Each time I have done so to discuss with you a matter I believe affected national interest. I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
With your request for an interview, and to say, after having discussed it, my client is not necessarily opposed to the idea.
Really? That's terrific news.
Well, before you come up with any numbers, I should tell you that we already have $350,000 on the table from Mike Wallace and CBS.
Always give your best. Never be discouraged. Never be petty. And always remember, others may hate you, but those that hate you don't win unless you hate them. And then you destroy yourself. What perhaps very few people understand is that the taping system in the White House was set up by my predecessor, President Johnson, partly to avoid the necessity of having a secretary at every meeting, and partly to ensure there was a record kept of every verbal agreement, regardless of how off the cuff or casual. Initially, upon entering the White House, I insisted on dismantling the system.
The plot is, well, it basically follows the story of how Frost raised the money to get the interviews, the goings-on when they were actually taping, and there's a whole David and Goliath thing going on between David Frost and Richard Nixon, and it's sort of like almost like a verbal boxing match.
Righteous. You know as well as I do that 60% of what Nixon did in office was right, and 30% might have been wrong, but he thought it was right at the time.
That still leaves 10% where he was doing the wrong thing and he knew it.
I will guarantee you, if you screw us on the 60%, I will ruin you if it takes the rest of my life.
And I guarantee you, if you stonewall us on the rest, I'll return the compliment.
And it goes on to give Richard Nixon the trial that he never had.
And 5, 4, 3.
Mr. President, you came to office promising peace, but no sooner did you step into the White House than U.S. involvement in Vietnam deepened. The war was prolonged with calamitous consequences. Did you feel that you'd betrayed the people that had elected you?
It looked to me that the reasons for being in Vietnam were not adequately understood by the American people. This little girl, she couldn't have been more than 16, broke through the line of people there, came up to me and spat in my face. She just covered my face in spit. And she said, "You are a monster." Well, of course I wiped the spit off and I went inside and I gave my speech. But all the time I kept thinking, she was such a pretty girl, but the war had made her so ugly.
This is actually kind of an experimental space for the theater, because normally we do the shows on the stage in the main auditorium, but as you can see, we're in the community room right now, which we have been able to transform into a sort of black box theater, and we're planning to do this for future On the Edge shows, and this is kind of the first go-around on that, and it's coming along pretty well, so everyone should come check it out.